So we'll go ahead and create that sphere and go into our geometry creation panel here and click on sphere, and we're just going to draw that sphere out. And it's not quite as big as the other sphere. It's about 3/4 the size. And then we're going to use our align tool and just to make sure that it's nice aligned to the other sphere. Just go OK to that. Okay, so we'll go to a left view now. Just hit L for left, and Z is another keyboard shortcut that I use just to zoom to the object that I've got selected. And we're going to move, now that we know that that's aligned perfectly, we're going to move it forward, and we're probably going to scale this guy down a little bit. So just go into the modifier for the sphere and just bring the radius down, and then we're just going to move it forward just till it lines up where our eye flattens off up here. We want to move it so that it just lines up, and we're just going to actually bring it back a little bit, scale it back up. What we're trying to do is line up a row of edges. You'll notice that I have this row of edges down here, and so that's the one I'm going to shoot for. So if we try to line it up there, it'll move as we move the radius, but trying to line it up, you can sort of draw an imaginary line through here, and we're trying to line up this row of edges down here. That's probably close enough. We can play with the scale a little bit once we've got it cut in. I'm going to come in a little bit closer, and I think that's going to be fine. So you'll notice that it's not an exact curve of the larger sphere. It's because we've got a smaller sphere, it's coming at a little bit more of an acute angle. It's jutting out just a little bit more, and that's what we want. So let's put edit poly on top of that, and let's go into polygon mode and select all of the polygons at the back behind that line and delete. And now if we go into polygon mode here, we can bring that forward a little bit. Oh, we haven't taken enough. We'll go one more row of polygons and delete. So we'll just bring that forward, and we'll line it up perfectly with that line. You can see that line I'm trying to line it up on, and that's going to work nicely there. So let's just go to a front view now, and you'll see that I'm a little bit out on scale. So we're just going to scale that object up slightly, uniformly scale it up just until it meets that line on the larger sphere, and it's working nicely. And you will notice also that the lines, the edges on that smaller sphere match the edges on the larger sphere, and that's pretty important, given that we really want we want that surface to feel like it's smooth and it's coming off the larger sphere. So that's fine for the cornea, and that's going to work fine. And given that we just scaled that up a little bit, we need to just go to a left view, make sure that it's right up against our sphere, and what we'll do is just go into our hierarchy, effect pivot only, and center to object, and that's just going to bring it over here so that we can move it a little easier. And we're just going to bring it back until it's nicely aligned with that edge. And that's perfect. So we'll bring up our material editor, we'll apply our material to it, and what we can do is select all of the polygons which we've got there, slide all the way down, and give it a ID of 4. And now that's our cornea material applied to it as well. So we might just name these. We've got eyeball, we've got iris, we've got pupil, and cornea. So they're fine. Just to give you a quick look at what that's going to look like, we're just going to go into the cornea material. We'll start with that one, and we're just going to wind the opacity down to 1. We're going to wind the specular up to about 180 is fine, and the glossiness up to about 65, and we'll give that a quick render. And we don't have any lights in the scene, so it's only relying on max default lighting, but you see that we're starting to get the effect that we're looking for with that cornea. And we've got a lot more to do with the materials, but that's a good start for our model. And the very next thing that we need to do is, we might as well, while we're here, we're going to do an eye lid, and this is quite an easy process. So we're in a top view there, and while we're in a top view, we're going to draw a sphere, and we're going to draw it from the center of the eye and draw it out just so that it's a little bit bigger than the eye. It has to be big enough to cover the cornea, because you've got to remember that the cornea sticks out a little bit further than the sphere for the eyeball. So we'll use our align tool, and we'll align it to our eyeball, and we'll go OK to that. And now we can come into our modifier stack and just reduce the radius slightly. That's probably going to do it. We're very close to that cornea there, so it's going to be fine. We're going to go to a front view now, hit Z, and what we're going to do is reduce the hemisphere. We're going to knock it back to 0.5, and there's our eyelid. And what we're going to do is rotate, just a view rotation, and we're going to rotate it up. Now you'll see, if I leave it on the edge of the eye here, see what's actually happening? Because that if I isolate that sphere that we've just created, it has a base to it. By using the hemisphere at 0.5, it automatically creates a flat surface underneath it. And if I move that hemisphere, you'll see that that's what actually happens there. But we don't want that, because if we take that out of isolation mode, you'll see the problem that happens here. If I give that a render, that's a very evident problem, and we don't want that. So we don't want that visible like that. So what we're going to do is go with an edit poly, and this is on the eyelid, and then we're going to select the polygon that's on the bottom. Let's just isolate. Alt Q isolates the geometry, and we'll select grow, and that selects all of the polygons on the base, and delete. And now you'll see that it's an open-ended surface there. It has no polygon in the center. Now we'll come out of sub-object selection, and we'll give it a shell modifier, and we're going to give it a shell modifier of about 0.3, maybe a bit bigger. Oh, see what's happened here? We had a few polygons selected at the back, I believe. No, we didn't. Our shell's just too small. So go a bit bigger on the shell. Oh, and we want the shell to be on the inner amount, not the outer. So reset the outer to 0, and the inner amount we're going to select, wind it in. Now I'm not 100% sure why that's happening at the back there, but we'll sort that out. Let's get rid of the shell modifier, and we'll make sure, first of all, we'll make sure our, that's on 0.5, should be fine. We'll go to a front view. We'll straighten this back out so that it's completely flush 90 degrees, and we'll try that operation again. We'll give it a edit poly. We'll select all of these polys down the bottom here, and then we'll hold Alt and deselect these ones up the side, and that will select everything at the base. We're going to delete, and then we should be able to put a shell modifier on that now. Yeah, and that's worked nicely. So the inner shell is probably about 0.4, and we'll just unhide the eye to see how that's working. We can go a bit bigger and probably go, keep winding it up until it sort of reaches the eye there, and that's fine. And you can see straight away we've gotten rid of that problem. It cuts into the cornea, but that's fine because that's not going to be visible, but it doesn't show this convex iris shape that we've cut into the eyeball. The fact that it's a solid eyelid is not showing through now, so that's working fine. You could always give it an extra segment on the edge here. If I bring up the wireframe, just give it an extra segment, just creates an extra segment around the edge, and that way if you wanted to you could always put a mesh smooth on top of it, and that gives you a sort of a curved off eyelid there. And we'll go to a front view, and you'll see if I rotate that now, we've got our eyelid. And the beauty of this system too is that if we were to just animate, which some people tend to do, I don't particularly like it. Some people will go to the sphere hemisphere setting we set to 0.5, and then they wire that setting to a controller for blink controls. But what that actually does is cause a flat, flush eyelid line that comes straight down the surface of the eyelid. But what we've got here, as we go up, it causes a curve, and as it comes down, it causes an opposite curve, and that's a lot more accurate. I think it looks a lot more natural. So there's our eyelid and our eyeball, and what we can do is just bring up our layer manager. We'll unhide the body. With the eyelid selected, we're going to bring up M, and we're going to use a blank swatch, and then we're going to use our eyedropper and eyedrop the face or the body. And this is another multi-sub material that I've got on the body, and you can see there you've got your main body, leather, black fill, shorts, socks, lips. So pretty much a material for everything on the character. The only thing that isn't in this stack here that is these sort of belt buckle objects. And what we want to do, we want to use the main body material on the eyelid. So the best way to do that is to select the eyelid and come down now into our edit poly, and just go into a wireframe. We want to select all of the vertices, all of the polygons in our edit poly, and I believe we've done that. I'll just Alt Q to isolate it, and edit poly, select all of the polygons. Not too sure why they're not showing up there as selected. Okay, I just had the display up the stack, and because it's a shell, we weren't able to see it. So if I select all of the polygons there, we can slide all the way down and give it a material ID of 1. Now we can go back up the stack, and we can apply this material, the Zac body material, to it. And now if we come out of isolation mode, go to a front view, we've got our eyelid working with that material on it. Come down, close it down a little bit, we can rotate it around. There's a bunch of stuff we can do, but that'll become a lot more apparent as we move forward and we move on to the rigging, which is just in a little while. We've just got to finish off our materials for for the eyeball. So that's pretty much the modeling that we need for this character, and we're going to quickly jump into Photoshop now and do some modeling. In fact, just before we jump into Photoshop, the only thing we need to do in Photoshop is the iris design. So we'll just select our eyes, and we'll come into our layer manager and we'll hide the body, and we're just going to select our eyeball, and at the moment it's called eye proxy, so we'll just rename that to eyeball, and we'll select our eyelid, and we'll rename that eyelid, and we'll select our cornea, there's our cornea there, and then the last one is our circle, which is our pupil. So I'll go OK to that, and that means, and if I just hit H to bring those up, we've got our pupil, we've got our cornea, we've got our eyelid, and our eyeball. So that's fine for now, and we can move on to some materials. I'm just going to bring up my, remember, as I mentioned before, we've got to make sure we've got some lighting happening so that we know how our materials are working. So let's just bring up our layer manager again and unhide our body, and just slide our layer manager out of the road, and we're going to create a key light to start with. So let's go to our lighting in the creation tab, bring up our standard lights. We're going to use a target direct, and we're going to drag off from the bottom left here, we're in a top view, somewhere into the center there. Then we're going to right click on top view, go into the views and direct, so we're now looking through the light just so that we can work out where we are with it. And now we're going to just use the center mouse button just to move. We can also use the hand down the bottom here to move, and we're going to arc rotate the light up, not too high, that's probably enough. And from a front view you can see now we have that light up there. And the next thing we need to do is set up our renderer. Now I'm using V-Ray in this exercise, but you don't need to use V-Ray. You can use whatever you want. The principles are exactly the same. So, and I'm not even going to be using any V-Ray material types. I will probably use a V-Ray map for reflection, only because V-Ray rendering doesn't particularly like ray tracing. But if you were using the equivalent for you when we start to get to any reflection maps is to use a ray trace reflection map. But yeah, V-Ray doesn't like ray trace reflection maps very much at all. So I've got my V-Ray renderer there set up. I'll move into the second tab in V-Ray, come down to the reflection refraction environment override, and by default it'll be empty. It'll look like that, and they won't be ticked. So we'll tick the reflection refraction, we'll select, click on bitmap, and we're going to navigate to where we've stored our reflection map, and we'll go OK to that. Now if we bring up our material editor, and just any empty swatch is fine, we're going to slide that over onto a swatch as an instance, and that way at the moment you'll see that it's set up as a texture. We need it to be set up as an environment, and we also need spherical map as the mapping type. And that's all we need to do for the environment reflection. And the next thing we need to do, in fact we can leave I'll just slide this out of the road. We can leave GI for now. We won't worry about that. We'll come back to that later. So we'll switch off GI in the indirect illumination box, and we'll just give that a quick render. You'll see how that lighting's working, and so far not too bad. and we'll just select that light. We're going to go into the modify stack, open all. Open all just opens up all the tabs. We're going to give it a multiplier of 1 is fine. I'm just going to come off the pure white a little bit, just a little bit of yellow in there, and set up shadows and come down to V-Ray shadow. You could use a ray trace shadow or a shadow map if you weren't using V-Ray. We'll slide all the way down. We're going to switch off transparent shadows, and we're going to use area shadows, and the size is fine for now. If it's not, we can always adjust that later on. Subdivisions up to about 10 is going to be fine, and we'll give that a quick render now and see how that's working. And that's working pretty well. He's a bit dark at the moment, and that's because we don't have global illumination switched on. So just while we're working, we want to be able to render quite quickly, and global illumination will slow your rendering down. So we're just going to create another ambient or an omni light in the scene, and we're just going to place it anywhere in the scene is fine. Ambient lights aren't really directional. They don't require any specific placing. So once you go into your advanced effects here in the omni light, we can set it up for ambient, and we're going to give it a multiplier of about 0.35. And now if we give it a render, you'll find that it's a little brighter and we can see our character a lot better, and that's looking great. And we'll replace that ambient, we'll switch that ambient light off later when we switch on some GI for the final render. So let's move into our eye now. We can bring up our layer manager and just hide the body again. We'll go into a front view. There we are. Switch off the edge frame, edge loops for now. Okay, so we'll bring up our material editor, and we're just concentrating. I can drag a material over the top of this. It just gets rid of it in the swatch. It doesn't get rid of it in the material, in the environment, in the scene. It just gets rid of it out of the material editor. It's just so that we can focus on this one here. And we can do the same with the body. We can always bring it back later with the eyedropper. So just so that we're focused on this material here, we're going to bring up the cornea first, and we're going to go into the maps for the cornea, and down in reflection we're going to switch that on and click the map radio button there. We're going to go into, slide it down, and we're going to select a V-Ray map. And like I said before, if you're not using V-Ray, then you can use a ray trace map, and that will work fine. So as you can see at the moment it's set to 100%, and that's huge. We need to really knock that back. We're going to knock it back to about, let's say about 30 for now. We'll make it 40, and then we're going to go into the V-Ray map there, and we're just going to wind this filter color down a little bit. I'm just going to darken it down just a bit, and we'll give that a quick render. And you'll see that we're now getting some reflection on that cornea area, and we can probably wind that down again. Let's go about 26 on that, give it a render, and that's working pretty well. Remember, there's going to be a lot more detail on that iris, so we don't want to confuse that too much. So let's go about 22, and that's going to work fine. We can probably darken it just slightly in the V-Ray settings. Yep, I'm happy with that. And we'll just tighten up this gloss hotspot a little bit more. We'll go up to a pure 70, and we'll crank the specular level to an even 200. And we'll make the ambient color a little bit more neutral. That's going to be fine. Okay, nice. Now that's it for the cornea. Let's just finish off the pupil here. We'll go into the pupil, and we'll make sure that its ambient is black, and diffuse as black. There's no gloss and no specularity, and you can probably even give it about a 15 on self-illumination, and that's fine. Once we get some lights in, you'll notice that that's going to really make a bit of difference, that there's no gloss and no specularity, and that a bit of self-illumination is always good. And for now, we can probably do a little bit of work on the iris, given that we will be adding a map to it. But we'll take that iris. We want to make the ambient color quite dark, go all the way to black, and we'll get the specular level up to about 35 and the gloss up to about 15. So you want quite an open, you want the specular highlight to be quite open. You don't want it too tight like this. You want it nice and open, so about 15 is nice. And straight away you'll see, even in the viewport, you can see that it's working a lot nicer. We're getting that, given that the light is sort of over my left shoulder, it's coming down over my left shoulder if I was the cameraman. We're getting this highlight area here, but we're getting a nice sort of darker area over here. And then as the character, if the character was to turn around or the light was to change, that would be interactive in the iris area. And once we get the detail in there, it's going to look lovely. So that's working nicely. We can probably give it about a 10 self-illumination. That's probably a little bit too much. Just give it 5 on a self-illumination, and that's all we need to do to the iris. We'll come up now and we'll work on the eyeball, but before we do, we'll go back into cornea, and we're going to right click on the V-Ray map here. We're going to go copy. Now we can go up to the eyeball material. We can slide all the way down to maps, and in the reflection we're going to right click, paste instance. What that's going to do is, actually we'll just undo that. We're going to, on the reflection, right click, paste copy, not an instance. And I'll show you why in just a moment. That we don't want it exactly instanced of the reflection map from the cornea. We're going to come up, we'll do the same specularity. We're going to go 200 on the specularity level, and glossiness an even 70. And the ambient color, I'm just going to go sort of a deep blue, something like that is fine. And the specular color, we can wind that back up to a pure white, and then just come back a little bit, maybe into a blue, actually just a little bit into a blue. And the diffuse color, we're not going to make pure white, we're going to bring a little bit of blue into it, but not much at all, just like that. Now we'll give that a quick render, and obviously the reflection level is way too high there, so we'll come down and you'll notice that it's set to 100, so it needs to be set to that 22. We'll go okay. We're starting to get something that we like, and what we can do is, with the V-Ray map here selected, and I'll just bring the material up so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to click on the V-Ray map, come into it, and then click where it says V-Ray map here, and in yours it might say ray trace map. I want to click on it, navigate to a fall off, and go OK. And it'll say discard old map or keep old map. We want to keep the old map, the V-Ray map that is already here. We'll go OK, and you'll notice that that V-Ray map is now in the black swatch here. So what we're going to do is give it a fall off, a Fresnel fall off, which will allow us to have more reflection around the edge of the object, and it's always relative to camera, that edge, and less reflection in the middle. So we'll just click Fresnel, and down here you'll see there's a bit of a curve. We're just going to click on the add point. We're going to add a point, and we're going to slide that up, and you'll see that straight away. It's actually worked in reverse. It's got less around the edge and more in the middle, but we can flip this around. So get it right where you want it, and that's probably pretty good. Now we're going to just use this flip button, swap colors, and now you'll see that we've got a lot more reflection around the edge and not as much in the center there. And we can probably tighten that up a little bit more. I'll probably come back a little bit. Somewhere in between those two. Tolerances are actually quite tight on this operation. And we can even add another point and just bring it down. That just helps it. And that's now, if we give that a render, you'll see that we've got a lot more reflection around the edge and a lot less in the center, and that's working exactly the way it should be. Okay, so there's our basic materials, and we'll just slide up now. What we want to do is set up one more light in the scene just to see how these specular highlights and everything are working. At the moment we've only got one direct light, given that this one over here is an ambient light and it doesn't have any specular value. So what we want to do is create another light, an omni light, somewhere opposite to the direction of the key light. Somewhere over here is fine. We'll go to a front view. Given that this one's high, we'll make this one sort of lower than the eye, and then we'll go into the center, the settings of the eye, of the omni light, and we'll make it 0.75, and we'll make it slightly bluish light, and we'll slide up until we get to advanced effects, and we're going to deselect diffuse so that specular is the only one selected there. Now if we go to a front view, hit P to make it perspective, maybe slide it around a little bit. We'll see how this is rendering. And it's starting to look pretty nice. We'll just unhide our character, see how it's working with the character. Unhide the body, unhide the teeth, see how that's working. And it's starting to look pretty nice. So we're happy with it now, to the point where if we hide the character again, we'll come to a front view. Actually, we're going to need that character unhidden, so we'll select all of the eye, and we'll bring up our character again, and we'll bring up our wireframe, and we're going to shift and drag across. So probably not in wireframe, we'll do this in shaded mode with wireframe, just so that we can reference the wire to see where we're going as we move it across. So shift and move across just until we line it up. Look for those visual references of the edges and where they line up on the other side, and that's pretty close, and as a copy. And you'll notice now that it's created a copy of all that geometry, and it's just named it the original name with 01 after it. So what we need to do now is, with that eyeball selected, we're going to use tools, rename objects. It's a great little tool. The first thing we're going to do is give it a prefix. We're going to leave the existing names that it's already got, but we're going to prefix the name with LFT, which is left, given that, and you always name your left and right on an object relative to the object itself. So if you were this character, that would be your left eye. Cool? And the other eye would be your right eye. So we want to prefix it with left underscore and just leave that, and then we want to remove the last two digits because it's put 01 on the end of those digits, and I'll just bring up Layer Manager here and you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking about. You'll see you've got eyelid 01, eyelid ball 01, eyeball 01, cornea 01. So now with these ticked and set up, we can go rename. And now if I just close that and open it, you'll see that they've been renamed to left eyelid, left eyeball, right eyeball, and so forth. So we'll just leave that rename open for a moment, and we're going to select, we can use our Layer Manager to select them. So select eyeball, pupil, cornea, and eyelid, and just hit the select highlighted. And now it's selected those objects. And the only thing we need to do here, we don't want to remove the last 2 digits in the rename. What we want to do is just prefix it with RT and just say rename. So now we've got left eyelid and all its pieces, or left eye and all its pieces, and right eye and all its pieces. So with Layer Manager open, select all those like so, and select them using the arrow, and then hit the create new layer, and then we'll call this eyes. And now our eyes are all in that layer, and we can isolate them, we can freeze the rest, and everything's going to work nicely there. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is our iris design in Photoshop. So we'll go over into Photoshop now,